On the morning of 27th August 1944, near a French village, a man fired a green flare into the sky. It was a signal. Within an hour, almost every German officer and NCO in the battalion lay dead, shot out of the saddle or overpowered, and the soldiers who killed them wore the uniform of the Waffen-SS. These were not Allied commandos, they were men of the 30th Waffen-Grenadier-Division der SS, a unit Himmler had ordered raised to fight Bolshevism. A few weeks after its first deployment, it went over to the French resistance in whole battalions. This is the story of the most unreliable division in the entire Waffen-SS. A unit the Nazis built from people they themselves considered inferior. A unit with blood on its hands before it fired a single shot in France. And a unit whose men ended up in opposite worlds, some as decorated heroes of France, others rotting in the Gulag. Start with the name because it already gives a lot away. Its full title was 30. Waffen-Grenadier-Division der SS, russische Nummer 2. Not SS-Division, but Waffen-Grenadier-Division der SS. That difference of a few words was no accident. A real SS division was reserved for Germans and for peoples the Nazis considered Germanic. But in the summer of 1944, the SS desperately needed men. So it came up with a trick. Units made up of soldiers the Nazi creed saw as inferior were given the label Waffen-Grenadier der SS, subordinate to the SS yet not truly part of it. Historian Leonid Rhein describes them as men the regime despised serving that same regime, untermenschen in SS uniforms. And right away I need to clear up a misunderstanding, because online it sometimes looks as if there were two different 30th divisions. There were not. There was one unit numbered 30, which carried two names during its short life. The first, and by far the most important, is the Russian one, the 30th Waffen-Grenadier-Division der SS, russische Nummer 2, the real division of around 10,000 men from 1944 that went to France and mutinied there. When it fell apart in early 1945, the Russians went to Vlasov's army, and the Belarusian remainder became first a brigade and then once more a division renamed Weißrutänische Nummer 1, the 1st Belarusian. But that was a division in name only, with only a single regiment, and it never fought again. Same commander Hans Siegling, the same corps of men, one continuous line. This story is mainly about the first one, the Russian division of 1944. The Belarusian successor only appears at the very end, as the last, almost empty remnant. To understand who these men were, we have to go to occupied Belarus. After the German invasion of 1941, the occupiers set up local auxiliary police everywhere, the Schutzmannschaft, Schuma for short. In Belarus it grew to tens of thousands of men, local recruits, some volunteers, some forced, some prisoners of war who chose between serving or starving. That police force did not direct traffic. According to historians such as Martin Dean and Leonid Rhein, it played a direct role in the anti-partisan war and in the Holocaust in Belarus, where roughly 90% of the Jewish population was murdered. Anti-partisan action was often a cover. The SS general Erich von den Bach-Zelewski summed up the logic coldly. Where the partisan is, there is the Jew, and where the Jew is, there is the partisan. Under that pretext, entire villages were wiped out. In the summer of 1944, that system collapsed. With Operation Bagration, the Red Army crushed German Army Group Center and retook Belarus. The collaborators knew what awaited them, so they fled west with the Germans. In East Prussia, the occupier combined the surviving police units into the Schutzmannschaft Brigade Siegling, named after its commander SS Obersturmbannführer Hans Siegling, the last SS and police leader of White Ruthenia. In early 1944, that brigade also took on two Ukrainian police battalions plus Russian and Cossack units. Out of this scarred collection, the 30th Division was born. Before we go to France, we have to be honest about who some of these men were. One of the battalions that later defected, the 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion, carries one of the darkest pages of the entire war. On March 22, 1943, a group of Soviet partisans ambushed a German column near the Belarusian village of Katyn. Among the dead was Hans Wilke, a German officer who had won Olympic gold in a shot put in Berlin in 1936. In reprisal, the 118th Battalion, together with the notorious Dirlewanger unit, entered Katyn. According to research by historian Per Anders Rudling, they herded the population into a barn, set it on fire, and shot down anyone who tried to flee. 149 people died, among them 75 children. Katyn was not an exception. In Belarus, more than 5,000 villages were wholly or partly wiped out. Katyn became the symbol of them all. This belongs at the heart of the story, not in a footnote, because it changes how you see the rest. The men who are about to defect and be decorated in France did not arrive in the West as innocent victims. They came from a world of collaboration, and in the case of units like the 118th, of direct complicity in mass murder. Back to the summer of 1944. The SS, which officially wanted nothing to do with Slavs, decided to form Russian and Eastern European divisions anyway. The need was too great. On July 31st, 1944 came the order to forge a full division out of Siegling's brigade, and on August 1st it was officially established in occupied Poland. Sources differ on the exact strength, but the most frequently cited estimate is around 10,000 men at the start. The majority were Belarusian, alongside Russians, Ukrainians, and smaller groups of Cossacks. The officer corps was almost entirely German, and the officers who were not German could be assistants at most. From day one there was trouble. Germans and non-Germans did not trust each other. The leadership sent the men's families to Germany to work, effectively as hostages against desertion. And still men deserted during training. They had sworn to fight Bolshevism, so in the East. Instead, the leadership sent them to France to fight the resistance. For many soldiers that made no sense. They had no reason to die in France for Hitler. In mid-August 1944, the division went by rail to northeastern France near Belfort and Mulhouse. The vanguard reached Strasbourg on August 18. The task, to help the German 19th Army with anti-partisan operations in the Belfort Gap, the natural corridor between the Vosges and the Jura, and so protect the German army's line of retreat. What happened next sounds almost too strange to be true. Two of the battalions sent to the Belfort Gap were Ukrainian, the 102nd and the 118th. Their commanders, Major Lev Loba and Captain Negrebetsky, had already decided to defect at the first opportunity. There was something else. On the way, the Germans forced the Ukrainians to repair a stretch of railway the resistance had blown up as a punishment. When the Germans then wanted to shoot 5 French civilians in revenge, Loba stepped in personally and got them released. That gesture was noticed by the local population and by the resistance. Through intermediaries, contact was made with the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, the French interior resistance. The plan was simple. The Ukrainians would kill their German cadre and defect. On the morning of 27 August 1944, near Neuilly-le-Ferroux, Loba gave the signal with that green flare. The mounted officers and the NCOs were dealt with in under an hour. Out of around 820 men, the Ukrainians reportedly lost only 2 soldiers. At Camp Valdahon in the south, Negrebetsky's battalion did almost exactly the same at the same time. Together, the defectors brought over more than 1,200 trained soldiers to the resistance, plus an enormous haul of weapons, anti-tank guns, mortars, dozens of machine guns, and piles of ammunition. The resistance took them in as the 1st and 2nd Ukrainian battalions. The men preferred to name themselves after Ukrainian heroes, the Ivan Bohun Battalion and the Taras Shevchenko Battalion. On September 2nd, the defected Ukrainians ambushed 2 squadrons of SS Cossack cavalry from their own former division near the village of Melin. They defeated them and freed 20 French hostages who were about to be executed. For the German command, this was a disaster and a humiliation. Field Marshal Walter Model, the supreme commander in the West, signaled to SS headquarters that the division was defecting in battalions to the bands, killing German officers, and was utterly unreliable. He recommended disarming it and putting the men to work as forced laborers. On August 29th, 2 more battalions fled across the border into neutral Switzerland, where they were interned. After all this, the German command held an investigation. It declared around 2,300 men unreliable and pulled them out of the division. As punishment, those men had to dig on the west wall, the German defensive line. What remained was a fraction, somewhere between 5,500 and 6,000 men. In Alsace, the leadership tried to raise morale. There were medals, shooting and marching drills, and lectures painting the Western Allies and Bolshevism as one and the same threat. One battalion commander even spread the lie that the defectors had been handed over to the Soviets by the French to discourage desertion. It did not help. Short of food and supplies, the division began plundering French villages. And yet the picture was not black and white, because the depleted remnants sometimes fought. Surprisingly well. When the French broke through the Belfort Gap in mid-November, The German command at first refused to let the 30th Division go to the front because of its record of mutiny. In the crisis, it committed the division anyway. On November 22, 1944, the division fought the French 1st Armored Division and was credited with 6 destroyed tanks. The war diary of the German High Command in the West even praised its courage. There lies the bitter contradiction. The same unit that had murdered its officers and defected in battalions could at another moment fight stubbornly. It could not last. In late November, the division abandoned its positions. Siegling concluded it could no longer fight. By the end of December 1944, its strength had dropped to about 4,400 men. In early January 1945 came the order to disband. The unit withdrew to the Grafenwöhr training grounds deep inside Germany, and there it fell apart along the fault lines that had always been there. The Russian troops went to the 600th Infantry Division, the 1st Division of Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army. Strikingly, it was those Russians who turned against the Germans in the final days of the war, during the Prague Uprising, only to fall into Soviet hands afterward. The Belarusian troops ended up in a Belarusian SS brigade, which in March 1945 was briefly renamed the 30th Division, the 1st Belarusian. This is exactly that second name from the beginning, the Weissrutenischen No. 1, a division on paper which amounted to nothing. In April 1945, it too was disbanded. The Americans captured the last Belarusians at Grafenwöhr and brought them to a camp in Regensburg. Many of them managed to avoid forced return to the Soviet Union, partly because they came from a part of Belarus that had belonged to Poland before the war. And the defectors. Their fate shows the cruel morality of the war's end. The Allies had agreed that all displaced persons would be returned to their home countries. For anyone who had served in the Waffen-SS, that meant almost certain death or the Gulag. The French solved it in their own way. They took the entire 1st Ukrainian Battalion into the 13th Demi-Brigade of the Foreign Legion in one go. It is the only time in the history of the Legion that a whole foreign unit was inducted this way. Still in German uniforms and black berets, they fought in the capture of Belfort. Hloba and 2 of his commanders received the Croix de Guerre. One soldier, Danilo Klim, even received the Legion of Honor in 1963. For the 2nd Battalion, it ended differently. Of around 350 men, most chose the Legion, but the rest were sent back to the Soviet Union, where they were arrested and sentenced to 25 years of forced labor. The same betrayal, 2 opposite lives. And then there is the reckoning that was never fully settled. Think back to Katyn. Some of the men guilty of that massacre escaped precisely by fleeing west. The Katyn killer, Vladimir Katriuk, lived for decades as a beekeeper in Canada and died there in 2015 at the age of 93, shortly after Russia requested his extradition. Others, like the Chief of Staff of the 118th Battalion, Grigory Vasyura, were tried much later and sentenced to death in Minsk in 1986. The same man could be both hero and murderer. That is what makes this story so uncomfortable and so necessary to tell. This past is not dead. In 2022, the Belarusian Ministry of Internal Affairs put the slogan "Long live Belarus," Żywi Białoruś, on a list of Nazi symbols, arguing that the 30th SS Division had used it. Critics point out that the slogan was coined back in 1906 by the poet Janka Kupala and became widely known through the protests against the government in 2020. So the history of a forgotten SS division is, 80 years later, still being used as a political weapon. The 30th Waffen-Grenadier-Division, their SS, existed for less than a year. The Nazis built it from people they despised, held it together with coercion and by holding their families hostage, and it fell apart the moment it could. But the men in it carried a past that weighs far heavier than that short existence. That is why this chapter is worth telling, not because it is clean, but precisely because it is not. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in the next video.